Every crime hides a story. Every story waits to be uncovered. Welcome to Truth Unraveled.
Police! Police, stay where you are! Stay where you are! Chill out, man. Put your hands behind you.
The echoes of armed officers' voices cut through the air at Birmingham Airport, September 2023. Stepping off a flight from Pakistan, Anis Mahmood thought he had pulled off the perfect escape. 4 months abroad, 4,000 miles from the streets of Birmingham, and he believed he was finally beyond the reach of British law. But the second his shoes touched UK soil, he walked straight into a trap. Officers had been tracking him, waiting for this exact moment. It was the downfall of a fugitive who imagined himself untouchable. The capture didn't just end his run, it dismantled the last piece of Britain's most powerful county lines conspiracy, a network worth nearly £1.8 million. This wasn't a story of petty drug peddlers. This was an organised empire, run with military-level planning. 4 separate drug lines, Rico, Diego, Figo, and Potter, came together in an unprecedented alliance. Normally rivals, they put aside their turf wars and built a cooperative machine that flooded Birmingham's streets with heroin and crack cocaine. Every single day, more than 1,000 calls rang into their phones. Over 200 addicts were served with ruthless efficiency. It wasn't chaos, it was a business model. One designed to squeeze as much profit as possible while keeping police guessing. But detectives weren't blind to what was happening. Leading the charge was Detective Sergeant Craig Tennant and his County Lines task force. They had seen drug networks before, but never anything this structured, this calculated. This was a criminal coalition unlike anything West Midlands Police had encountered. And so began Operation Hunaran, a covert war between masterminds who thought technology made them invisible and investigators determined to tear their empire apart. If you're ready for a story with more twists than a Hollywood thriller, hit subscribe and stay with us. What comes next will change how you see the war on drugs forever. November 2022. On the surface, Birmingham looked like any other busy city. But beneath the noise of daily life, something unusual was happening. Drug users across the region began receiving identical bulk text messages, not from a single dealer, but from 4 different drug lines. Their names would soon become infamous: Rico, Diego, Figo, and Potter. For Detective Sergeant Craig Tennant and his team, this was the first red flag. They were used to turf wars and rival lines battling for dominance. But the data coming through surveillance told a different story. Instead of fighting each other, these groups had merged. They had done the unthinkable, formed an alliance. The task force watched as this coalition began running its empire like a corporation. Over 200 addicts were being served daily, and phones buzzed with more than 1,000 incoming calls. The profits were staggering, between £18,000 and £20,000 every week. That's nearly £100,000 a month, funneled into the pockets of just a dozen individuals. Tennant understood immediately what he was dealing with. This wasn't random street crime. It was a professional enterprise. Every bulk message sent was the digital equivalent of shouting on a street corner, except instead of reaching a handful of people, these blasts targeted hundreds of users at once. What the criminals didn't know was that each text, every call, and every top-up left behind a digital trail, and every trace was being captured, logged, and analysed by one of the most advanced surveillance operations British policing had ever assembled. The Empire believed it was untouchable, but behind the scenes, Operation Hunaran was already tightening the noose. And soon, the cracks in their empire would begin to show. Here's how 12 individuals built a criminal empire that generated nearly £2 million in just 18 months. The RICO line was one of the most organised drug lines ever uncovered in Birmingham. It was operated out of Hodge Hill by brothers Adam and Harun Iqbal, alongside their associate Mohammed Osman. These men weren't petty dealers hustling on street corners. They ran their line like a genuine business, carefully structured and ruthlessly efficient. 2 dedicated phones acted as their lifeline. Customers dialed in around the clock, and the trio fielded orders as if manning a call center. The phones rarely stopped ringing, each call representing cash in their pockets and addiction fed on the streets. When police eventually raided their property, Harun and Osman were caught red-handed, still holding the active RICO handsets. That single moment, captured in an arresting photograph, became the most damning piece of evidence. The phones didn't just connect them to the trade, they were the trade. With both devices live in their hands, their guilt was undeniable before a jury ever heard a word. The Diego line, by contrast, carried the swagger of arrogance. Headed by Yayen Sadi, with Adam Slater and Tiana Phillips handling distribution, this crew believed themselves untouchable. But police surveillance revealed otherwise. On February 3, 2023, Slater and Phillips were stopped by officers in Solihull. At first, it seemed routine. Another car pulled over for checks. Yet when investigators later cross-referenced mobile data, the Diego line phones had been pinging towers in the exact same area at the exact same time. The overlap was too precise to ignore. The Diego line's mask of invisibility was beginning to slip. Arrogance struck again just 11 days later. Slater was stopped once more, and this time officers seized 2 phones. One of them was directly tied to the Diego network. In a single stroke, the Diego line was compromised. Their secret weapon, the dedicated handset, had become their downfall. Realizing the noose was tightening, Sadi attempted a desperate pivot. On February 17th, he abandoned the old network and migrated Diego to a brand new system, even changing his own personal number. He believed this would be enough to outwit detectives. But every move he made only created a clearer digital trail. Telecommunications experts mapped his calls and location data with forensic precision, while CCTV cameras followed his movements across Birmingham. Each attempt to cover his tracks only provided investigators with more evidence, solidifying the case against him. Meanwhile, the FIGO line showed that this was no collection of isolated gangs. Elias Sadi led the line, supported by Mark Seeley and Amani Adams. Surveillance footage revealed something extraordinary. Seeley's car was repeatedly spotted outside shops where Diego phones were being topped up. Far from competing, the 2 lines were actively supporting one another. It was evidence of collaboration, not rivalry. Proof that these supposedly separate drug lines were in fact cogs in the same machine. The Potter line ultimately exposed the truth of the entire operation. Run by Ansay Mehmood, Hamiul Remen, and Levi Mukita, it appeared at first to be just another street-level line. But phone records unearthed the revelation that would unravel the empire. Mukita wasn't simply a line runner. At only 25 years old, he was the supplier for all 4 operations. He was the shadow figure, the common denominator tying RICO, Diego, FIGO, and Potter together. Without him, there was no supply chain, no stock, no empire. He wasn't just a participant, he was the architect. For detectives, the discovery was the missing piece. This wasn't 4 gangs carving up the same city. This was a highly organized, integrated business enterprise. They pooled resources, shared infrastructure, and maximized profits in a way that mirrored legitimate corporations. Nearly £2 million flowed through their hands in just 18 months, fueling addiction, misery, and violence across the region. And yet, the same structure that made them strong made them vulnerable. The closer the empire grew to greatness, the more fragile it became. When one line fell, they all did. And with Makita's role exposed, the empire was doomed to collapse. May 2023. After 6 months of painstaking surveillance, wiretaps, and covert evidence gathering, the investigation had reached its breaking point. Detectives had assembled enough proof to dismantle the empire in a single, decisive strike. This was no ordinary operation. It was the largest coordinated takedown of its kind in the region. 17 warrants were drafted, targeting addresses scattered across Birmingham and Solihull. Armed units were briefed, specialist entry teams positioned at dawn, and surveillance officers waited in silence. At precisely 6 a.m., Detective Sergeant Craig Tennant gave the signal. The city erupted into chaos. Doors were torn from hinges. Flashing lights and shouting officers filled once quiet streets. At the Iqbal brothers' Hodge Hill stronghold, Harun and Muhammad Osman were caught red-handed, still clutching the Ricoh phones that had made them small fortunes. For investigators, it was poetic justice. The very devices that had sustained their empire became the evidence that destroyed it. Elsewhere, in carefully timed raids, Mark Seeley, Yayen Sadi, Elias Sadi, Adam Slater, Tiana Phillips and Levi Makita were dragged from their beds and taken into custody. Each arrest was another domino falling, another piece of the empire collapsing. The raids unearthed the smoking guns detectives had been waiting for, encrypted chat histories, detailed call logs, and hours of CCTV footage left little room for doubt. The communication system that once gave the network its edge now stood as an ironclad case file, a paper trail written in text messages and tower pings. But the operation wasn't flawless. 2 names slipped through the net that morning: Amani Adams and Hamul Ramen. Their homes were searched, yet both were gone. Whether tipped off or simply lucky, they vanished into the shadows. For weeks, detectives pursued every lead. Were they hiding abroad, living under false identities, or preparing for a reckless comeback? The silence was unnerving, the uncertainty a thorn in the side of the investigation. Then came a twist no one expected. In June 2023, exactly 1 month after the Dawn raids, both Adams and Remen walked into police stations and surrendered. Their motives remain unclear. Perhaps fear of a lifetime on the run, guilt over their role, or the stark realization that the network they once relied upon had collapsed. Whatever the reason, their decision tightened the net around the coalition even further. Only one figure remained beyond British custody: Ansay Mehmood. While his associates sat in cells awaiting trial, Mehmood had chosen flight over fight, vanishing into the distance and resurfacing in Pakistan. But detectives knew his freedom was temporary. For a man once at the heart of a multi-million-pound empire, the clock was already ticking. His escape wasn't the end of the story. It was the beginning of the final chapter. While his associates were being rounded up in Birmingham, Ansay Mehmood made a very different choice. Unlike the others, he had no intention of facing a judge or surrendering to police. Instead, he vanished. His escape route didn't lead to another city, or even another region of the UK. He fled nearly 4,000 miles away, seeking refuge in Pakistan. For 4 months, Mehmood lived under the illusion that distance meant freedom. He moved through life as though geography had placed him beyond the reach of British law. He convinced himself that he had slipped through the cracks, that he had outsmarted West Midlands Police during the largest drug bust in their history. To him, the empire had fallen, but he, its self-appointed survivor, had escaped. But illusions have limits. September 2023 brought a hard reality. After months of covert surveillance, international tracking and intelligence sharing, detectives knew Mehmood's movements. They had monitored his contacts, traced his communications, and quietly waited for him to make a mistake. That mistake came when he chose to return to the UK. As Mehmood stepped off a flight into Birmingham Airport, armed officers were already in place. The operation was swift and deliberate. Within seconds, the fugitive who believed he had beaten the system was surrounded. Passengers watched as he was led away in handcuffs, his 4-month illusion shattered in a single moment. The man who thought he had cheated justice had walked straight into its arms. With Mehmood's arrest, Operation Hunaran reached its conclusion. Every significant figure tied to the network was now in custody. The painstaking investigation, which had stretched across months and involved dozens of officers, had finally dismantled the empire from top to bottom. The final act played out on December 4th, 2024, inside a Birmingham courtroom. By then, the evidence was so overwhelming that none of the defendants contested the charges. All 12 pleaded guilty. Call logs, CCTV footage, forensic phone analysis, and financial records had left them no other option. When sentencing came, it was devastating. Ante Mehmood, 12 years, 10 months. Adam Iqbal, 12 years, 6 months. Yaryen Sadi, 11 years. Elias Sadi, 10 years, 10 months. Levi Mukita, 10 years, 6 months. Mohammed Osman, 10 years, 6 months. Amani Adams, 8 years. Harun Iqbal, 6 years, 4 months. Adam Slater, 6 years. Hamul Rehman, 6 years. Tiana Phillips, 5 years. Mark Seeley, 4 years, 8 months. Combined, the sentences stretched to more than a century behind bars. For the communities of Birmingham and Solihull, the outcome was a statement. The empire that once thrived on their streets had been dismantled, its leaders punished. And for the criminals, it was proof that no level of profit, planning, or arrogance could outrun the reach of British justice. The numbers told one story. Over 100 years of prison time handed down to 12 defendants. But behind every figure was a deeper truth. Real lives had been damaged. Families torn apart by addiction. Streets scarred by violence. Young people recruited into criminal networks and stripped of their futures. Detective Sergeant Craig Tennant captured it plainly. This group caused misery in our communities. Operation Hunaran didn't just dismantle a drug network. It destroyed a carefully constructed empire that profited off human suffering. It also sent a message far louder than any prison sentence. No matter how sophisticated criminals believe they are, British justice will find them. Encrypted phones? Investigators turned them into evidence. Bulk texting? Every message was tracked. International escape? Distance only delayed the inevitable. The very tools criminals thought would shield them became the spotlight exposing them. But this story isn't only about one takedown. As you watch this, other county lines networks are operating across Britain. Other coalitions may be forming, using the same tactics, recruiting the same vulnerable young people, leaving behind the same devastation. The fight against organized crime never ends. It demands vigilance, advanced policing, and the cooperation of communities who refuse to let drugs and violence dominate their neighborhoods. If Operation Hunaran has shown anything, it's this. Criminals are never as untouchable as they believe. They thought they had reinvented drug dealing, but they miscalculated. They underestimated the power of technology, the persistence of investigators, and the reach of justice. From Birmingham streets to Pakistan and back again, this case proved that you can run, you can hide, you can change phones, networks, even countries. But sooner or later, justice will knock on your door. Stay with us for more stories that expose the dark realities of modern crime and the relentless pursuit of those who think they're above the law. Because in the battle between criminals and justice, one truth always stands.